Cyrus French, the Kingston Hat Man. Cyrus French came to Kingston, then called Little Rest, from Grafton, Massachusetts sometime in 1792. It was rumored that he had taken a very active part in Shays' Rebellion, which had caused a rather exciting time in the neighboring state during the late 1780s, and after the ending of that affair, he decided it might be well to move elsewhere while the going was good. He spent a short time in Providence where he studied law, and then, perhaps looking for a small village with a quiet name, came to make his home in Little Rest. Here French purchased a small building, which probably had been the former jail or part of the old courthouse, both which had stood on the site. He later laid out attractive grounds and built a much larger house, adding greatly to the smaller structure. One of the notable features of his large dwelling was the two-story front porch, which can very likely be remembered by the elderly of Kingston. Cyrus French was a large, jovial man who combined a love of nature, which soon became apparent by the attractively laid-out grounds around the home, with the happy faculty of telling yarns. His personality fitted well into the environment of the small New England village. He had brought with him a trade from his former home, that of making beaver hats. He found a wide and ready market. He spent his days in his workshop at the west end of the house and his evenings telling stories at Joe Runnell's Tavern, a place which served as sort of a club and gathering place for the menfolk of Kingston Hill. French made much of improving his property, which had now become somewhat of a show place in the village. About 1805 he cut down the steep bank in front and built the high stone bank wall which is still there today. In front of the wall he laid out a sidewalk, perhaps the first one in Kingston. This met with the disapproval of the then highway surveyor, who said sidewalks didn't belong on public highways. However, Cyrus won out as the sidewalk still remains. At another time, when placing some ornamental posts around the south side of his land, he incurred the ire of his neighbor, Timothy Peckham, who claimed one of the posts extended 2 inches over his property and brought suit against French. The case dragged on in the courts for a long time, and finally, when a jury visited the scene, they found that the 2 inches which had extended over Peckham's property had rotted away, so Cyrus won again. As time went on, Cyrus's son William grew up and married. A home for his family was erected on the west end of the mansion. He carried on the trade of hat making and took over the business as his father grew older. During his years, the scarcity of beavers in this part of the country made the material for beaver hats hard to obtain. William changed to the making of tall silk hats, which had then become the style. It was said that the long row of mulberry trees which surrounded the driveway was the result of William's idea of getting a supply of silk for the hats by raising his own silkworms. There is no record of whether the idea was successful, but we assume it was probably not. Both the elder French and son William were very active members and regular attendants of the Congregational Church across the street. Sometime during the early days of the church, built about 1820, a large stove was placed directly in front of the pulpit, which had a tendency to badly overheat the minister during his long sermons. Perhaps some of the members had it placed there in hope of making the sermons shorter. The good people in the center and the back of the church in cold weather had to listen attentively through a rather chilly time. However, on cold Sundays, William would arrive early at the church, get a good fire going in the big stove, and apply himself to heating up a large number of bricks which he kept handy near the stove. He would wrap each brick in a newspaper and hand one to each lady as she entered her pew. William's foot warmers were very welcome, and he got a thank you and appreciative smile from those fair ones as he handed each a hot brick. Another William followed, and a granddaughter, Anstice, who would be the last to occupy the old French homestead. Anstice was at one time a state inspector of jails. We have seen a report in which she spoke very highly of the condition of the neighboring Washington County jail across the street and its then keeper, Sheriff and Mrs. Charles W. Wilcox. Anstice lived in the big house alone after the death of her brother, carefully attending to the shrubs and gardens which, under her care, retained much of the beauty of the days gone by. Miss Anstice died in 1925 in the French mansion, at one time a Kingston showplace, soon fell into a sad state of disrepair. Mr. Vernon E. Helm, well-known Kingston resident, had been named administrator of the estate, and sometime in the 1940s, a group of Kingston people combined to purchase the property. The ruins of the once beautiful house were cleared away along with the trees and gardens, and in 1953, the plat was sold to the University of Rhode Island and is now the site of the group of brick faculty apartments. The story of Cyrus French and the French family of hat makers goes back into the early and glorious days of Little Rest, later the quiet and historic village on Kingston Hill, a story few remember today.